Welcome back to another edition of the Knight Report podcast. I'm your host, Mike Broadbent. Joining me once again is my co-host, Richie O'Leary, and special guest, Tim Verghese. He covers recruiting and football for Inside Nebraska on the Rivals Network. We're going to talk everything about this Saturday's matchup in Lincoln between the Scarlet Knights and the Cornhuskers. Tim, man, thanks for joining us.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Now, Nebraska's been down bad for a bit, but they're definitely on the way back up under Matt Rhule. What are the vibes around the program with regards to where this program's at on year 2 under Matt Rhule?
Yeah, I mean, there's a general sense of just you can tell that this thing is building up. I think a lot of the foundation is set right now, just in terms of the young talent that's there. Obviously, you have your young freshman 5-star quarterback Dylan Raiola. A defensive system that over the last 2 years or last 2 years has held up pretty well. They've taken a bit of a step back this year, but there's general confidence just around that unit defensively. Matt Rhule, dating back to Temple, likes to build his programs from the spine, from the trenches out. And, he's done that already, just landing young guys on both sides of the line that he feels can contribute. They've been able to already turn guys that were previously with the program from, like regular contributors, even in reserves, into either starters or guys have taken a step up. Tommy Hill was a guy that was kind of like trying to figure out where he fit in the program and in college football before Rhule and the staff got here. Now he's, projected top 2-round pick. Sierra Wright transferred in from USC after a bad career there. He's kind of turned into a pretty sticky corner for Nebraska as well. You're seeing the development of those two guys. John Bullock's playing like at an all Big Ten level at linebacker right now. He was like a 5th-string safety when Matt Rhule and his staff got here. So the development you saw from Rhule back at Baylor and back at Temple is showing up again. I think everyone thought this year could be a year where it's kind of like a year 2.5 rather than year 2. But as we're we're 5 games or 4 games into this now, or 5 games into this, it's been a year, a couple games into this now, and it's like, hey, this might be closer to 7-5, 8-4 than 9-3 or 10-2.
Yeah, it seems like Matt Rhule and Craig Schiano are kindred spirits because they're running their programs in a very similar way. So it'll be an interesting matchup on Saturday. I forgot that we have to pay the bills, so I have to do our ad reads. This podcast is presented to you by Knight and Day Apparel. Get ready for football and tailgating season with Knight and Day Apparel. Our apparel is designed to keep you comfortable and stylish from pregame excitement to the final whistle. Whether you're grilling in the parking lot or cheering from the stands, our high-quality gear has you covered with unbeatable comfort and team spirit. Use our promo code Rutgers Rivals to get 10% off your purchase. Score big this season and keep shopping with Knight and Day Apparel. We are also brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during games. Think you know your stuff? Get in on our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread each week for your chance of weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on the blackjack or poker action or unwind with 150 slot games. Head to the website today and get in on the action. BetOnline, the game starts here. Sorry about that, Tim. Let's transition to the offense. Obviously, you're led by the wonderkin freshman, all everything, Dylan Raiola. Talk a little bit about how he ended up at Nebraska, because obviously he was a long-time Georgia commitment, and then the connections, being a legacy, were always there. But what swung him to become a Nebraska commitment and ultimately the starting quarterback for the Cornhuskers?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different stories around here of just, what actually went down behind the scenes. In terms of just how this all came to be. Ultimately, the main, I think, the takeaway and the main, synopsis of how this all came down. Nebraska always tugged at the heart of Dylan and his family. Obviously, his father played at Nebraska legend, went on to play for the Detroit Lions, and there was always that tug. But under Scott Frost, for whatever reason, not for whatever reason, everyone kind of knows. But there were just multiple reasons it just never worked out under Scott. With Dylan, just the offense never fully clicked. There wasn't a path to, he's going to get NFL development here. There just wasn't a clear path forward. Matt Rhule had kicked the tires when he first got here, kind of showed some interest, but nothing was really ever super heavy reciprocated. Then end of the season comes around and it's like, okay, Nebraska's in search of a quarterback. They went after Kyle McCord initially. And it kind of got back to the Raiola family that, hey, Nebraska's kind of looking for a quarterback. And on their end, it was like, Dylan kind of felt that tug of like, hey, I could go to Georgia and be another guy at Georgia, or I could go to Nebraska and turn a program that I've cared about my entire life and try and be the person that helps turn that program around. And that's just kind of how it went down. And it helped. The pretty much the whole family was backing it. I think if you put a truth serum in the Raiola family, they would all tell you that they wanted him at Nebraska all along. It ultimately worked out for them. It worked out for Nebraska. He came in, and it kind of came together pretty quickly. And anyway, they got him committed. He made a last minute visit right before signing day. Ended up signing, and that was the story. He's on campus now. Kind of took control pretty quick. It is funny. People kind of thought he would come in and have everything kind of handed to him. That didn't necessarily happen. They opened up the QB job competition between him and Heinrich Harburg. They brought in a transfer in Jalen Gramstead, and they had another freshman in Daniel Kalen as well. So they had four guys pretty much competing for the starting job. And ultimately, by the end of spring or so, it was like, hey, Dylan's got something a little different than everybody else. And the spring game made it evident. Then Matt Rhule made it official over the summer.
So I know Mike and me have both watched a bunch of Dylan Raiola over the past couple of weeks, but for the average Rutgers fan that hasn't, just kind of describe his game and don't tell me the Patrick Mahomes cameos. I'm all over that. I'm so over.
Yeah,
it.
I understand the comparison from the look standpoint, but you watch him play, and it's not. There's similarities in the overall playing style, but they're not very similar. I think Dylan's best traits are his processing ability, his ability to change things at the line. You watch him the first game of the season, he triple checked from a look into something else that gave Nebraska, I think, a 30-yard rushing touchdown. Where the original play calls, I think a play action rollout pass, he saw something from the linebackers, checked multiple times just to confirm what he saw, and then got Emmett Johnson into a position where Emmett Johnson basically just had a free hole to run through. That's his best trait. You look at his success rate throwing. He's best over the middle, just like being able to read through progressions. He makes guys miss in the backfield. He doesn't take a lot of bad sacks. He does hold on to the ball. I think one thing he's doing right now, which is just a freshman thing, is he's holding on to the ball just a tick too long while he's making these progressions. But for the most part, he's very efficient with the football. Through the first 4 games of the season, he was well over 70% completion percentage. I think he's still right around there. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I think he's still right around there. Very efficient with the football, very safe. That's something dating back to high school. He doesn't turn the ball over much. He's got 2 interceptions on the year, but if you watch both of those plays, it's a 50-50 ball where he's counting on his receiver to make a play, and the receiver just gets the ball ripped from him by the defensive back. So it's not a bad throw by him by any means. I think, again, if you're looking at negatives right now or things that he could continue to improve on just as a young guy, it's just the internal clock, just having that speed up, and that'll come with time. They've kind of opened up the offense completely for him, allowing him to call checks at the line, flip the O-line, and even change routes if he needs to. So all of that, and also giving him full field reads. You don't really see that with college quarterbacks often, much less freshmen, where they're told to drop back and make 4 or 5 reads rather than just half field reads. And so I think it's all of that compartmentalized, and then you watch him throw. He's got all the arm talent in the world. He does the multiple arm angles things. He can throw on the run. Does a good job of resetting his platform, can hit it from 60, 70 yards out if he needs to. His touch, honestly, this year on deep balls, or accuracy on deep balls, hasn't been exceptional this year, which is wild considering that was one of his better traits coming out of high school. I think he's still kind of figuring out how to get the chemistry with some of these receivers right now, but you really like what you've seen. So again, for a freshman, 5 games into his career.
So you said before, Marcus Satterfield basically just gave him full reign to change the play at the line of scrimmage for a freshman.
Yeah,
that's crazy. That's crazy for a true freshman. You never
really
hear that. Yeah, insane.
So I want to talk about his pass catchers. You guys have 2 monsters on the outside, in Isaiah Nair and in Jamal Banks. Those guys are both listed at 6'4", 220, and Dylan Raiola is not afraid to throw the ball deep to those guys for 50-50 or 60-40 balls, whatever you want to call them. They also, I think they got, was it 4 defensive pass interferences called last week against Purdue? It seemed like every time they were throwing it deep, the way that Purdue was defending these receivers was just tackling them. How would you define the skill level of each, the receiver group? I know you guys also have some good backs out of the backfield in the passing game. You like to use the freshman Barney a lot in different formations on jet sweeps and pop passes. Just tell us about the receiver group that you guys are working with in Lincoln.
Yeah, Banks and Nayo are the leaders of the room, the top dogs in the room. Banks is the steady, reliable target. That's Dylan's safety blanket, if you want to put it that way. That's the guy on most of those. Hey, everything's out. I'm just going to throw it up to somebody. It's Jamal Banks typically. Nayo is more of the stretch the field guy. He's 6'4", but his best traits are just his ability to run in the open field and get open deep. He's been more of that deep threat for Nebraska, kind of that big play guy, while Banks has been that move the chains receiver. Then you've got Barney across the middle, and he's more of the slot guy, more of the gadget type receiver for them. They have another receiver in Jalen Lloyd, who's still averaging over 20 yards a touch. Doesn't get the ball very often, but when he does, he's electric with the ball in his hands. Speedster out of Omaha. So they use him and Barney. They rotate him out of the middle. Jaron Bonner's another guy out of the slot, more of a power slot. He's like 6'2", 220, 225-ish, and more of that big body in the middle that can do a couple different things for Nebraska. Another freshman, Carter Nelson, 6'4", 225. He's more of just a jumbo receiver right now. Was recruited initially as a tight end. He got on campus. They like him better at receiver right now, just from what he can kind of do over the middle. His role's growing. He had some early contributions last week, but kind of sat after that just because Nebraska kind of leaned on the run and their top two receivers. Dylan likes to spread the ball out. There's games where it's 8-9 different pass catchers, getting the ball. But he clearly has a couple favorites. Thomas Fedoni, the other tight end, his role's starting to grow a little bit in the offense too. But you really like Banks, Nair, Barney, Lloyd, and Fedoni are really the guys you need to know on a week-to-week basis. Nelson has some contributions from time to time. Obviously, the backs have some contributions in the passing game as well. But those are the real guys you need to know at pass catcher. And I'm actually intrigued to see how Rutgers stacks up, defensive on the back end, because I'm not sure if they've been tested by this type of size on the outside yet this year.
Yeah,
you're probably right. Washington had a potent offense, but I think Boston was their tallest receiver at 6'2", and their other top receiver was 5'9". So yeah, they were a good pass catching unit, but they didn't quite have that monster size that you guys have. In terms of, my question just fell out of my mind. Rich, do you have anything else about the receiver group?
No, not really the receiver group. I wanted to switch a little bit to the run game. There is some familiarity there because E.J. Barthel, the running backs coach for Nebraska, was Rutgers director of recruiting ops back in, what am I looking at, 2013, 2014. Also spent a couple years playing at Rutgers. But I want to talk about that room just because Rutgers' rushing defense has struggled mightily over the past couple games. How good is this unit? I know you mentioned they're pretty good in the pass game, but how good are they as a rushing unit?
They're still figuring themselves out. Nebraska has confidence in a group of 3-4 backs at the very top. Dante Dowdle, Emmett Johnson, Ramir Johnson, and Gabe Irvin. Irvin's coming off a hip injury. He's more of their short yardage guy, and you see him kind of late in games when they're just trying to hammer defenses. But Dowdle and Emmett Johnson are the top two backs, with Ramir rotating in as kind of like that scat little gadget back. Emmett's got better vision, can kind of can see things better. He kind of made his claim for the starting job last week just with the way he closed out the Purdue win. But Dowdle had a really strong start to the year. I think it's just become evident as the season's gone on and Nebraska's lost some guys on the O-line that his vision, Dante's vision, just isn't up to the same level that Emmett's is. Dante's a hammer, but he's a guy that kind of accelerates into contact. And oftentimes you're seeing him kind of run directly into the pile and getting caught up for a minimal gain, where Emmett makes one cut, is able to get skinny in the hole and find those little seams and create something out of nothing. So Emmett's the guy right now, and does some stuff in the pass game. They've got a good rotation, and I think that's where Nebraska's going to lean. What's Nebraska's going to lean on this week? As much as they obviously have that freshman phenom in Dylan, they've not been afraid to just lean on the run game in games where they feel they can. And I think this week they feel that they can and going to let Dylan kind of create off of play action and some of those heavy box looks.
Yeah, I know that the leader in terms of carries and yardage and touchdowns on the year is Dante Dowdell, but he hasn't been the most effective running back on the team. I was listening to some different podcasts for Nebraska, and they were talking about kind of maybe a switch in who the primary back is from Dowdell to Emmett Johnson. Do you think that would be the right move for this team, given how explosive Emmett Johnson's been? He's got 21 carries for 174. That's 8.3 yards per carry. That's quite a bit better than Dowdell, who in Big Ten play is averaging just 3.2 yards per carry.
Yeah, I think so. Just because again, like they had some losses on the O line. Micah Mizuka's was the starter at the beginning of the year. He's gone down and become a backup. They lost their left tackle Turner Corcoran, so they're not getting the same push up front as they did early in the year, where Dante had some holes to run through, and then it's up to him to kind of break through contact, which is where he's best at. So right now I think it's Emmett, just because Emmett does a better job of finding those holes, getting skinny. Contributes in the pass game. Dowdell's a really good pass blocker, and that's something where you're still going to see him on the field. And Nebraska does like to use a true stable. But I think you're going to starting this week. I think you're going to start to see the pivot from Emmett being the primary back.
Offensive line, obviously it's coached by Donovan Raiola. How much of a difference has he really made this year? Because prior to this year, I know he was an assistant line coach for the Bears for a couple of years, but other than that, it's been kind of lower level jobs for the most part.
Yeah, his development. He actually came in. He was the lone member of the staff that stayed over from the Scott Frost era. Mm-hmm. Scott Frost hired him his last year with the program, and I will say, you've seen true development from the tackles. Turner Corcoran, who's down and out for the year, and mm-hmm. Bryce Benhart. Those guys have played a lot of football for Nebraska, and a lot, especially early on, was not very good. But the last 2 years specifically, Benhart's taken a nice step forward. He's kind of just been a reliable right tackle for Nebraska. Turner Corcoran had an up and down year last year, but was having a strong start to the year this year. I think the biggest difference you're seeing with Donovan Raiola is just Nebraska's ability to develop depth and have guys. They lost two starting or two tackles. Teddy Prohaska was supposed to be the starting left tackle. He went down with a knee injury in fall camp. Then Turner, who's been the guy in the past, was competing both at left tackle and left guard. He kind of stepped into that role, but he went down for the season. And so now they've got redshirt freshman Gunnar Gatula starting at left tackle. And, they haven't really missed a beat. The Gunners kind of stepped into that role. They kind of see him as a tackle of the future. They weren't guaranteed or counting on him to play significantly this year, but obviously now they have to. And he's been solid. He's held up. Got a good test coming in this week. I think he's going to get tested a good bit. I think Aaron Lewis challenges Nebraska, is going to be able to challenge Nebraska's line in a couple of different ways. And I think, Gunner's a guy that you could potentially point at and be like, all right, just tee off on him. So I'm curious to see how he holds up once we start getting into better competition and some edge talent that can really threaten Nebraska. But we've seen from Gatula. And then on the interior, I think Nebraska's just been stout. Like Justin Evans is a smaller guy on the line, but he moves. He's one of the better pullers Nebraska's had in a while. On the other side, Henry Lutovsky, another big body. Not as effective as Micah Mizuka, but does his job and does a pretty good job of it. Ben Scott, the center, is just another reliable guy, veteran. Hasn't held up as well as he did last year. I think he had a real good year last year. He's kind of been a slow start this year, but I do think this line started to find their chemistry a bit towards the back end of the season. So, overall to say, I think there's been up and down on Raiola, just the impact he's had so far. But overall, I think you're seeing development, you're seeing recruiting success. They've landed some top guys out of the high school level and out of the portal. I think there's still work to be done in terms of just him securing his job as the O-line coach at Nebraska.
So safe to say his hire and his retention through the new staff was more than just landing Dylan, of course.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Just because, again, and like I was saying, with the previous staff too, you saw regression from the line more than progression, and you're mm-hmm. starting to see progression from Raiola and the group he has. Year over year, guys are coming back, choosing to stick with the team and getting better. And then on the interior and with some of the depth, there was a time under Scott Frost, Nebraska didn't have like a second string O-line, like a five group they could put out there as backups. Now they have three deep they can go to.
One of the last things I want to touch on offensively is you guys have had quite a few prolonged scoring droughts this season. You got to a 28-0 lead against Colorado, and then you didn't score any points in the second half. You only scored 7 in the second half against Illinois. Last week, you didn't score until almost the fourth quarter, I believe, against Purdue on the road. What would you attribute these long scoring droughts for Nebraska's offense to?
It's inability to finish right now. They've shown the ability to hold on to the ball and can move the ball, but once they get into like the 30-25, it's like they kind of struggle. They kind of taper off. I will say early in the year there was times, specifically that Colorado game, and even Northern Iowa, where it felt like the offense kind of took their foot off the gas a little bit. Rhule's never been the guy that wants to run up the score. And that Colorado game, I was a little rattled by the fact that they didn't score much in the second half. But then you hear the team after the game, and they were like, "Hey, we felt like Colorado quit at halftime. We felt like we'd made them quit, and we didn't really want to, or they didn't want to really play. We didn't really want to play at that point. So we just kind of took the foot off the gas, which you don't love to see. I think you want to keep your foot on the gas through all 4 quarters, and I think that's why last week was so important. Just seeing this Nebraska team finish a game out, even though they started as poor as they did, seeing them finish a game out was really important. But as an offense, right now, finishing consistently is something they're not good at just yet. And I think they'll get there eventually. It's just right now, it's just they don't have the best answers on third down. I think third down's right now where they get caught up.
Talk a little bit about the defense. This defensive line room has 2 guys that actually stand out in James Williams and Ty Robinson. How good of a pass rusher are both of these guys? And I guess how are they really going to stack up against this Rutgers offensive line?
This is going to be a great test, I think, for this Nebraska D line because this Rutgers O line has played really good ball this season. I've really liked what I've seen from that unit, especially the tackles. I think Nebraska's strength is Ty right now. He's kind of the guy that makes things go. Nash Hopmarker, number 0, is another one on the interior. Going into the year, those 2 were seen as Nebraska's best 2 defensive linemen. Nash lost some weight actually over the offseason, kind of slimmed down. And it's not really worked to his benefit so far. He's still been effective, but just hasn't been the dominant presence he was at times last year, while as Nash has put on some weight and become the dominant defensive lineman that kind of lines up all over the front. They've got 2 guys, I think, that they bring in on third down specifically that are Nebraska's arguably their best 2 pass rushers, in James Williams and Prince William and Mullen. That's Princely's little brother. Both those guys kind of line up at the wide 9 or even come down to the 7 tech and just kind of tee off from the ends. Both are fast, fluid edge rushers. Ty on the inside is kind of lines up all over the place. He just kind of bullies guys. He doesn't have like pass rush moves necessarily. He's just more so just like a bully, like he's just big and strong and kind of dominates in that sense. So I'm curious to see how that works this week, just because he's been able to do it against lines that against specifically offensive linemen, he can do that too. I don't think he's going to have that success this week. He's going to have to string some moves together and find ways to win consistently. So will Nash, so will the rest of the room. Nebraska's been effective getting after the quarterback out of blitzes and sending guys, but there were times this year where they were kind of comfortable sending 4 and letting everyone sit back, and pressure wasn't getting home. I think they're realizing they still do have to send 5-6 guys to get home consistently.
Yeah, I know having a single digit is a huge thing in the Nebraska program. I'm looking at your depth chart. 9 of the 11 starters on defense are single digit guys, the only other being Jamal Banks on offense. Is that an indictment on how good this defense is, or is it just like a tone factor that this program's trying to set where, we have, we're going to play a certain way on defense and those guys deserve those numbers?
Yeah, coming into the year, it was kind of just they returned so much from this defense that the feeling was, hey, this unit's just going to pick up right where they left off. But they shifted their base from they were playing 3-3-5 man base last year to 4-2-5 quarters this year, and that quarters the back end being quarters has kind of led to softer coverage shells you've seen or softer coverage in general. And again, they're not rushing as many as they did. They've kind of shifted back this last week. We'll see if it continues this week. They've kind of shifted back to what Tony White likes to do best, which is be unpredictable, run that 3-3-5. Give the offense some crazy looks up front where you've got like 5-6 guys up on the line, and then you don't know where the pressure's coming from. So they're kind of getting back to what they like, but it's a veteran group that has some high end contributors. We talked about Ty Robinson, Jamari Butler at defensive end. He's missed some time, but but he is a guy that's been effective for Nebraska. John Bullock, like I said, is playing at an all Big Ten level right now at linebacker. And then their secondary, is a bunch of veterans back there. There's individual guys I think you could point to and be like, okay, you can throw at this guy, but you like what you've seen from Tommy Hill in coverage. He might miss this week just because of an injury. But in the back end, Deshaun Singleton's really effective as a run defender, can hold his own in coverage. And then Isaac Gifford's kind of there like rover, do it all back end defender that lines up in a bunch of different spots.
We know on Rutgers side, Kyle Malonga does a really good job of getting to that second level of the defense. How is this linebacker room planning on stopping him? I know it's obviously going to be a jersey-on-jersey matchup a little bit between him and Mekhi Bayer.
Yeah, actually, I'm very interested how Bayer reacts this week. This might be a little bit emotional for him, just getting back to playing some guys he's familiar with, a program he's very familiar with. For Nebraska, I think this weekend it really is just about preventing all the leaky yards. That's been a problem for them the last 2 weeks or last 3 weeks specifically against the run is just letting those additional yards come. But they're doing a better job the last 2 weeks specifically of rallying to the football on defense, kind of getting guys to the ball. And I think you're going to have to see that again this week where you're seeing 4 or 5 guys from the secondary and linebackers just rallying to Kyle and making sure they stop him in his tracks. But that's the big thing is just trying to prevent those leaky yardage, making strong open field tackles. Gifford and Bullock specifically are real good in the open field. Bayer is as well. But some of the other guys, you can kind of hit them and you can bounce around them.
Isn't Mekhi related to a former Rutgers player as well? I know he went to Irvington, but I could have sworn he was either a brother or cousin of a former Rutgers guy. And if you don't know it off the top of your head,
I don't know it off the top of my head.
No.
Yeah,
that's all good. So let's talk about this secondary. Your entire starting secondary, single-digit guys. Tommy Hill, you already said, might miss this game. He's a senior. A lot of experience back there. I know you said that you were kind of the defensive unit in general hasn't lived up to last year or lived up to the expectations of taking the step forward. But who are some guys to watch in the secondary, and have they, been, you said there's a lot of leaky yards. Is that just from the soft coverage, or is it because guys are getting beat?
It's a little bit of both. Part of it's soft yard for the soft coverage. I think they got back to playing a little more man last week, and I think this week they're going to see them do that a little bit just because of the matchups they have offensively. I think they can stick with these Rutgers receivers just in man for the most part, and so I'm curious to see what we see from them. I think the guys to keep an eye on, Marquise Buford, number 3. He plays the other cornerback spot opposite Tommy Hill / Sierra Wright. I think it's going to be Sierra this week. Buford's a safety corner hybrid, really good tackler in space, really good open field tackler, a guy that's going to lay a boom, and a guy that kind of comes up against screens and comes up, against the run, and is a really effective defender both in the pass and the run. Malcolm Hartzog's a guy that, if you're looking at someone in the secondary to point at and throw at, Hartzog's about 5'9" maybe even shorter. He's listed at 5'9", but I've stood up next to him. I'm 5'9", and I'm taller than him. But he's a guy. If you were looking at, he's strong in coverage when he's in front of guys, but he can get lost sometimes, and just the size advantage. Like he against Purdue, for example, like he's matched up on the tight end. It's just like I didn't love that matchup at all because there's nothing. He's limited frame wise, limited range wise. So if you're looking at a guy to throw at, it would be Malcolm. And then on the other side of the field, I think Sierra Wright played exceptionally in a reserve role behind Tommy Hill the last 2 weeks. A guy that's really taken a step from after transferring in from USC, kind of playing like the top 100 recruit he was. Really sticky in coverage. You saw him last week, kind of holding his guys. He plays through the hands really well, really sticky in coverage. And I think with him on the field, Nebraska feels comfortable in man just because they think he's a guy. And when Tommy's back, they feel those two guys can completely eliminate the guy they're on.
So let's transition to the third unit of the team, special teams. I know it's been a bit of a 4-letter word for Nebraska fans this year. So Nebraska's had 4 block kicks on the season. They've had a block punt. They're 4 for 9 kicking with a long of 31 yards. It seems like the problems have been all over the place. It hasn't just been one thing. Greg Schiano has blocked 71 kicks in his time as the head coach at Rutgers, and he scored 63 non-offensive touchdowns. This seems like a really bad matchup for Nebraska. Talk about why the special teams units have been so bad, and kind of what they're trying to do to fix that?
It's been odd. It's been odd to say the least. Like, that's the best way to put it. Is there's been snapping issues, there's been holding issues. Tristan Alvano was the kicker last year, was expected to be the kicker this year, but he's been dealing with the lingering injury. And even when he's played, he's not been effective necessarily. He's missed some kicks too. But yeah, it's just right now they've got a guy in Johnny Hole who they like and they feel is making kicks in practice, but it's not translating to the field for whatever reason. And understandably, there's issues with the holds, there's issue with the snaps, of course, but at the same time, it's like, hey, you're a kicker, the job is on you, and regardless of what the situation is up front, it's for you to get the ball through the uprights, and he hasn't done that. So I think it's legitimately getting to the point where if Nebraska's past the 50 and or into the 40, it doesn't really matter where they are on the field. I think you kind of have to go for it rather than settle for the field goal, just because it's not a guaranteed 3 points, and you don't want to leave the field empty-handed or at this point with what this offense is, especially in this type of game. I think every point matters in this week's matchup, and you don't want to leave the field empty-handed. And so I think you're going to see Nebraska go for it on fourth down more than settle for field goals. But we'll see. I mean, they've been persistent in trying to get Holt's confidence up, trying to get the unit's confidence up overall. So they may just send them out there a couple of times if drives stall, just to try and gain that confidence. Hey, kick or two goes through, you feel better about it the rest of the game. But as of right now, it's just been a mess. And they've traded. They brought in a new right before the season. They brought in a new long snapper to try and bring some competition into that room. That's never a good sign. You never want to be like right before the season, all right, we need another long snapper, because if the starter's not been super effective. And then they've rotated back and forth between those two the last 2 weeks. So just a lot of moving pieces, a lot of just it's been a mess. That's been a mess. Punting's been solid, but the gunners haven't been there. When Tommy Heal's been out there at gunner, it's been effective, but anybody else on that side, and it just hasn't had. They haven't been able to pin punts deep, even though Bushini's done a good job of pinning stuff inside the 20. They've not been able to rally to the football and bring those balls in. They've been effective as a punt return unit and as a kick return, just getting the ball forward and not losing the football. But I wonder if we see that, just because special teams is such a key for Greg Schiano and his team, that I wonder if we see that ultimately decide this game this weekend.
Penalties. Nebraska is one of the most penalized teams in the country, if I recall correctly, numbers-wise. What just seems to be the issue? Is it just youth? Is it the coaching staff not having these guys prepared? Or
it's been a couple of different things, and if you really ask Matt Rhule, he'd probably tell you right now there's like 10 to 15 penalties over the last 2 weeks specifically that he doesn't think are penalties, just because of, it's just been just Big Ten refereeing at its finest. The last 2 weeks, and Nebraska's been on the unfortunate end of some of it. They've been the benefit of it too. Like we said, some of those PI calls they got last week against Purdue aren't necessarily PI, but Nebraska will take it. And it's just been refereeing across the board. It's kind of been a mess. But yeah, I mean, 40 at this point, it's like when it's been a mess, but you're leading the country and with how many they have compared to Rutgers and some of these other teams in the conference right now. At some point, you got to look internally and be like, hey, this is a team issue, not a system issue. It's just been somewhat undisciplined play. O-line, there's been some false starts, some holdings. Nebraska's not great perimeter blocking right now. That's just been an issue all year. So a lot of those calls are holding either from the line or from receivers out blocking the backs type stuff, from the receivers out in space. It's been a lot of that defensively. It's just been a lot of, again, they threw Sierra right in pretty early. They've thrown some young guys in pretty early in coverage. They've not held up. Up front, you're seeing a little bit of guys trying to get home and trying to do a little too much, where you're seeing hands to the face. You're seeing some face masks. You're seeing some, some unnecessary roughness type stuff. It's just a little bit undisciplined right now. And it's one of those things where I think Nebraska's trying to play with that edge, but it's a little too much right now. And it hasn't cost them yet, but I think, eventually it will. And at some point, I think the staff's going to get it, or try and get it dialed in or locked back in a little bit.
You mentioned Tommy Hill being banged up. Are there any other injuries to watch in this game of impact players?
Javen Wright's been in and out. He came back last week. He's missed most of the year, but he was back last week. So just how big of a role he plays this week, how healthy he is. Like we said, Gunnar Gatula is pretty much that third left tackle for Nebraska. He's been effective so far. The best way to put it has just been like you don't really notice Gunnar's out there in a good way. Doesn't really have any unnecessary penalties. Isn't getting beat on just one-on-one. So you've liked what you've seen from him. He's been effective. But again, I think Nebraska's going to get a real challenge here in Rutgers front and defense in general. So how he holds up against it, I'm curious to see. Outside of that, off the top of my head, again, Tristan Alvano, we'll see if he's out there this week. I don't think he's going to be this week, but Nebraska's working through a couple just like minor bumps and bruises. We'll see if those Sierra Wright did get banged up last week, came back in and finished the game, so we'll see how healthy he is this week. Just a handful of those type of things, but Nebraska's relatively been clean injury wise this year.
So we've gone through basically every single thing I could think of Nebraska-wise. Let's get into predictions. I think, this is a game where I think Nebraska's oscillated between a 6.5 point favorite to 7 to 7.5 point favorite. Where do you see this game actually? How do you see this game playing out? What's your score prediction for the game?
My score prediction right now, I don't see Nebraska covering. I think this ends up, if Nebraska's going to pull, I think Nebraska pulls this off just because they've got the home crowd environment on their side. It's a homecoming game. I think it's going to be a little raucous, and I do think this game's going to be tight. I think this is a game where the margins absolutely matter. Every little thing matters, like you say. The little things right now do actually favor Rutgers. Special teams, that's Rutgers' favor. Penalties, that favors Rutgers. Those little things right now favor Rutgers, but on Nebraska's end right now. I just think this Rutgers offense is very similar to the one they faced in Illinois, the one that gave them trouble. But the difference is I think Nebraska feels better about the matchups they have at quarterback and the matchups they have at receiver than they did against Illinois. While, obviously that running game, Kyle and Samuel Brown, I think are both very effective running backs and guys that are really going to challenge Nebraska. But I think Nebraska's defense, their goal is going to be force Athan to throw, force Athan to make decisions, and force them to come make plays in this game. I have it right now. The prediction I put on our side is 28-24 Nebraska. That's kind of where I see it playing out. But I could see that score reversed 100%. I think this game is real tight right now. The only edge I'm giving Nebraska is the home crowd, and I think offensively, I think Nebraska is just a little more well-rounded than Rutgers is, and I think Nebraska, again, like I said, is going to have a chance to run the football this week.
How about you, Rich? How do you see this game playing out?
It's kind of everything Tim just said. It's just going to be a very tight game. It's going to be close. I think Rutgers' run game should be able to take advantage of that Nebraska defense. I think Kyle Monangai should be able to hit 100-plus yards. He does that against basically everybody at this point. That's not even like a feat anymore. But I think the difference maker at the end of the day is going to be the up front. And I think Rutgers might have the advantage a little bit when it comes to offensive line versus defensive line. If they can protect Kyle and give him some running lanes, and then on top of that protect Athan and just let him do his thing that he's been doing, and just playing consistent football, not turning it over, I think Rutgers pulls this one out, and I think it's going to come down to special teams and penalties. I think Rutgers, like we just said before, has blocked how many kicks under Greg Schiano? Like an insane amount.
71.
Yeah, it's absurd. They had 2 blocked last week from Purdue. So I think that Rutgers has the edge on the special teams. Now, I know they don't have really a return game, but in terms of blocking kicks, blocking punts, they're very good at it. And then penalties. I think end of the day, penalties are going to either make or break this game, whether it be for either side. But right now I have it 24-21 Rutgers, and I think it could go either way. Like Tim said before, it could go complete opposite. Well, maybe not 24-21 because their field goal kicking's rough.
Yeah.
But you get what I mean.
I agree with everything you guys said. I had Rutgers in my preseason prediction starting off 4-0, getting their first loss in Lincoln. My stand on the team has changed a little bit in the sense that I didn't expect Athan Kaliakmanis to be this good. Virginia Tech came into the game against them in Blacksburg with kind of the same game plan you were talking about, where we're going to stop the run and force Athan to pass. And he went 14 of 16 for 259 yards on short and intermediate routes. So he just carved up Virginia Tech's defense. I think Nebraska has a better defense than Virginia Tech and a better home environment, but I don't think that they'll just be able to, completely bottle up Rutgers offense by, stacking it in the box. I had 5 keys for Rutgers winning this. I'll just go through them quickly. Establishing the run early, getting a lead. Rutgers has only played from behind in 7 minutes all season. So they're very comfortable doing it, and I don't think that if they get down 14, they're going to be able to come back with the way that they like to play. Making Dylan Raiola uncomfortable. I know that when he's pressured, he's only throwing completions at like 47% as opposed to when he's clean at 77%. Big play on special teams needs to happen, in my opinion, in order for Rutgers to win this game. And since we don't return punts or kicks, it's got to be through the blocks. So we got to get one of those. Keeping Raiola contained and not letting the game turn into backyard football. Like you said, he likes to hold onto the ball and let guys open up downfield or throw it deep and get DPIs. And I thought it was a really great point that you made earlier, where anytime they get past the 50, they're probably going to have to go for it in, fourth and medium to fourth and short. And that was my final key. Rutgers has to be prepared to play 4-down football all game because their kicking game has not been great and their offense is really good. So I'm going to, after all that's being said, I'm going to say Rutgers finds a way to win because, like you said, the little things they do better. I'm going to go against my preseason prediction. I'm going to go 24-20 Rutgers, but I could see this going either way. I don't feel great about this prediction. It's a true coin flip, the truest coin flip we've had this year. I was very confident Rutgers would beat Virginia Tech, despite the fact that they were an underdog, but I do not feel that same level of confidence against Nebraska, nor did I feel it against Washington. So just to kind of give you an idea of where I'm at. Tim, we really thank you for your time. I got one more topic I want to hit you with. What's Nebraska's NIL situation like? Have you guys been able to kind of beef that up the last couple of years, get guys that you want? I know that you got a former Rutgers basketball player in Gavin Griffiths, not primarily due to NIL, just kind of wanted to also point that out. But how's the NIL situation at Nebraska?
It's gotten better. When Nebraska lost Trev Alberts, the athletic director of the Texas A&M in the spring, and there was a lot of uproar about what happened there. Obviously, Trev, Nebraska legend and all of that, but they brought in Troy Dannon, and Troy immediately came in and just emphasized, hey, how important NIL is in this day and age, how important investing in it is, and Nebraska's made 1890 the official partner, or they've officially partnered with the university, and so they're basically running it through the university right now, and they're up there. Like I think right now they use NIL not to win high school recruitments; they use it to retain guys on the roster. Nash Hutmacher, Ty Robinson, two guys that could have declared for the draft or left the team, ultimately decided to come back for 5th and 6th years. And on the other side, Bryce Benard, Turner Corcoran, same thing. Tommy Hill, exact same thing. So they've been able to retain guys on the roster through NIL. They've also been competitive, they were in that recruitment. They got in late on David Sanders, but we'd heard behind the scenes they had a pretty competitive offer out there for him. They've got a pretty competitive offer out there for Michael Terry, who's being recruited by Texas and Oregon, one of the few top 100 prospects still left, one of the top receivers in the country still left on the board. So Nebraska's at least in the market NIL-wise with some of these top teams in the country, but they're not the team that's going to go out and bag 15, 20 players per cycle. They're going to bag a handful of guys or use NIL to help land a handful of guys per cycle, and then use the rest of that NIL money on the back end to retain guys on the roster, keep guys happy, keep guys from transferring. And again, they've been effective on the basketball side of it with it as well, just using it on transfers, using it to keep guys on the roster. Jawan Gary's coming back for another year, and Bryce Williams is as well, and NIL is definitely part of that. So it's definitely gotten a solid boost over the last few months, and I think it's only going to continue to grow. I think what's holding fans back from donating right now and this being a real weapon for Nebraska is they just want to see results. They haven't seen results in so long. They feel confident about this team under Dylan Raiola and Matt Rhule. But I think results, making a bowl game this year, is so critical for Nebraska's NIL efforts.
Sweet.
Well, Tim, thank you so much for joining us. I thought you provided some awesome insights to this Nebraska program. Where can our Rutgers fans find your work and on social media?
Yeah, I'm Tim Verghese. I'm at InsideNebraska.com, our Nebraska Rivals site. We've got our own YouTube stuff over at the Inside Nebraska YouTube channel. We had our game breakdown up this morning as we're recording this on Wednesday. We posted that this morning. We'll have bold predictions up later this week on the game as well. I can give mine right now I'll say it again there, but my bold prediction right now is I think, again, special teams affects this way some way or another. I could see 2 special team scores. Nebraska's been itching to kind of return a kick this year. This might be the game they potentially do that. On the other side, I think a block kick, like you say, a block kick or a block PAT from Rutgers absolutely is in the cards. It just feels that way. Block punt as well could definitely be in the cards. So I could see 2 special team scores somehow, some way. But that's where you can find me. I'm at Tim Verghese on Twitter as well. Yeah, it's just fun. I appreciate y'all having me.
And bold predictions indeed.
All right.
We
Well,
like to get a little crazy with them.
That's right. That's why they're bold.
Well, thanks again to everyone for listening, and thanks for Tim for joining. For me and Richie, this has been another edition of the Knight Report podcast. Signing off.